living la vida low carb. This show is changing lives. We talking about your diet, trying to get you feeling right. Cut up them avocados, fry some eggs. Time to explore the longest running health podcast, hosted by Jimmy Moore. Time to give up the crappy garbage. We're getting into ketosis. Every day is a new step to your goal. Yeah, you're getting closer, motivated and focused. Don't stop, just go. Time to get inspiration from the Living La Vida Low Carb Show. Hey, the livinglowcarbshow.com.
So guys, that right there is Kat Owens. She is an FNTP, a functional nutritional therapy practitioner. I think I got all that right. And a CPT. Remind me what that is?
It's a certified personal trainer.
Trainer, yes. Okay. I just didn't want to flub it up. I saw that and I was like, that could be literally anything these days. There's so many letters after people's names. So, but she wanted to talk about something that I thought was really interesting. And it's the whole notion that the biblical diet is one that is plant-based. It's one that I know you've heard for many years, Kat. And by the way, Kat is a keto fan, low-carb fan. I think at one point you were carnivore, and you probably still eat mostly meat in your diet now. And so people believe that, and we're going to get into that here in just a moment. But I met you at the ADAPT events that Dr. Westman was putting on several years ago. I think they're going to start those back up here in 2022, so I'm excited to see those coming back out again. And yeah, you're a nerd when it comes to all this stuff. You're trained in it. You're teaching clients and all this. And so tell us a little bit of your background, because you have a unique angle being an FNTP with military background and things like that. So kind of tell us your story a bit.
Yeah, so I got into nutrition the way a lot of people do, with my own health journey, right? But I actually started a little before that when I was running cross country. I ran cross country and track all throughout high school, part of college. And so it really started that in high school, I just wanted to eat as best as I could for my running. So I had some friends on the cross country team, I think when I was a sophomore in high school, who all decided that we weren't going to drink soda anymore. And so I decided no more soda. I really didn't drink a lot of soda anyway. I'm pretty blessed that I have a family. I grew up in a family that always ate pretty healthy. And, you know, we've all learned a lot about what that means, and that's evolved. But we didn't have a lot of soda. We didn't have processed foods. We always ate meat. We, you know, had butter instead of margarine. So I stopped drinking soda. And then a little while after that, I decided I wanted to step it up. And I decided I wasn't going to eat any more sugar. I really was just trying to eat as healthy as I could with the little knowledge I had in high school. But I was very strict about that. No sugar at all. I remember my mom made these crackers once, and she put like a teaspoon of Worcestershire sauce in them. And one of the minor ingredients in Worcestershire sauce is sugar. And so I like refused to eat them. I was so strict about it, which just seems funny to me now, because looking back, you know, I was still eating pasta and bread and all these refined carbs, you know, cooking oils when I went out to restaurants, things like that. So it was after college really that I started really researching nutrition and learning a lot more about it. I went to college at the Air Force Academy. I was playing around with the paleo diet as best as I could when I was in college.
Yeah.
But it was after that that I started experiencing some digestive problems, some low blood sugar. Definitely nothing as crazy as a lot of people who get to this point. Yeah. But even just those little symptoms, I knew that my faith has always kind of informed this for me. I knew that God didn't make my body fundamentally broken. And so it just didn't make sense to me that when I went to these doctors, they were saying, well, there's nothing we can do, or maybe you just have to carry sugar pills around with you for your blood sugar. And so I just immediately started doing a lot of my own research, started learning how much I love nutrition. And yeah, I was active duty Air Force for about 6 years. I'm in the Air Force Reserve now. You know, one thing I see that's just tragic to me is how many health problems people in the military have. I don't think the military sets people up for that.
Well, think about it. On the commissary, the foods available at the commissary, and correct me if I'm wrong, they're following the dietary guidelines. And so that's why you see people like me and, of course, yourself and other people trying to change the guidelines. People are like, what's that matter? I'm like, military commissary is a big reason.
Absolutely correct. Yes. And last time I went into a dining facility, you know, the on base, this is what they serve people. They're promoting plant-based meats, and they've got these little signs about this is a green food, a red food, a yellow food. And you can imagine, you know, it's just not doing anything.
Give me all the red is what I would say.
Yeah,
red
that's
meat.
kind of what I was doing. Yeah. Yeah, so I got my certification as a nutritional therapy practitioner several years ago. That was a goal I had for a long time. And now I am, I've got an online e-course. I'm coaching people, helping them get started on low carb. But one of my big focuses, as well as cutting sugar, cutting those processed carbs,
Yes.
is also the healthy fats. I think that's huge.
Yes.
And yes, and as a nutritional therapy practitioner, it's all about food quality as well. So I think those things are just huge for getting to the root cause and long-term success.
I think the fact that the Atkins diet, which is what I did 1,000 years ago, it feels like 17, 18, whatever it was years ago, it got people's interest in low carb and healthy fats and things like that. But it didn't really talk about food quality. Then paleo comes around as the next big diet trend. And they're like, no, it's not macronutrients, it's food quality. And then lo and behold, keto and carnivore come around. And I think we have been able to integrate the best principles of all those low carb diets, including Atkins, Protein Power, all the ones that were out back in the day, with the best principles of the paleo diet, focusing on gut health, feeding the microbiome, making it real whole foods, getting quality sources of food. That keto and carnivore benefited from that. Now, you still have people that love to do this so-called dirty keto. Come on, people, stop it. Eat better food. Yes, okay, you can lose weight doing that. But overall health, you're never going to get overall health until you focus on nutrients in those foods that you eat, which only come from the quality foods.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, so this is where we are in our culture these days, and people are doing the best they can. Of course, right now, meat has gone up about 25% in price over the past year with some of the inflation that's happened. Any tips on what people can do before we get into the Bible? Any tips people can do to help get good quality foods while still trying to keep the budget tight?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very doable, but that's a very real concern. I never want to tell people, just blow all your money on this. I just got a half cow delivered. A local rancher here in Kansas where I live delivered it to our house, all frozen, all butchered, completely grass-fed, grass-finished cow. And when you buy it in that kind of quantity, the price comes out to be pretty good. And it makes it so easy because every dinner I'm just, all right, let's pick out a roast, a steak, whatever. Right. So that's one thing I always try to recommend to people. Look into that bulk meat, especially.
And backyard chickens are very appealing now more than ever before. Mine have been molting for a while. They just started pooping out eggs again yesterday as of the recording of this. They had gone 3 months without any eggs. So I actually had to go buy some eggs from the store. Dun, dun, dun. And I got some from the farmer's market the last time I was there. So it wasn't really the store, but you know what I mean? Not my girls laying me eggs. And so that was kind of weird, but now they're very good and very easy to take care of. It's not as hard as people think. And if you still eat plants, you can grow your own plants in a greenhouse. I mean, there's always ways to be connected to your food, and of course, connect with your local farmers. My farmer's market's closed for the winter, and so in the weeks leading up to them going away, I would go and buy like 20 pounds of grass-fed beef, ground beef. I'd buy some pastured pork, and I've got a deep freezer on my front porch that I will have plenty through all the winter. And of course, I locked in the price as well when I did that. So if they have to raise their price, I have my food. And so there's always a will. There's always a way.
Yeah, awesome.
Yes. So guys, again, low carb with Kat. I did not tell them your username over on Instagram. So low carb with Kat with dots all in between. So low.carb.with.kat. And you can go check her out over there. But let's get into this topic du jour that we were going to talk about here today. Because I grew up in a Christian church. And I grew up good old Baptist boy. My mom played the organ. And you would hear and read scriptures that made it seem like that the biblical diet, whether you believe in the Bible or not, it's really irrelevant here, guys. From a historical perspective, a lot of people use the Bible in that way. But if you're a Christian, all the more to pay attention, because people use the Bible to justify eating a plant-based diet. And so where does that come from?
Yeah, so there's several different things people will use in the Bible that I've seen to try to justify this. And I think there's a lot we can learn about nutrition from the Bible, actually. Like you said, whether we read it as God's word or whether we read it as this well-authenticated historical document. But in the New Testament makes it very clear that none of this is to mean that there's no morally right or wrong way to eat. We eat certain ways because it's what's best for us. But when we see people try to use the Bible to justify a plant-based diet, it's a poor interpretation. So one of the main things that you will see is going back to Genesis, so the very first book in the Old Testament, when Adam and Eve were still in the Garden of Eden, sin hadn't entered the world, death hadn't entered the world. God gives them food to eat, and he gives them plants, and he gives them seeds. And so it's pretty well understood that at that time, people did eat a plant-based diet. But that was when the world was still perfect and there was no death in the world. So that makes sense, right? Obviously, that changed. After the flood, so a little while later, Noah, loads up the ark with all the animals and his family. After the flood, gets off the boat, and God very clearly at that point says that now animals are for you to eat. So biblical scholars disagree whether people were eating meat before that, after the fall, after sin entered the world, or if it was after the flood. Regardless, at some point, animals were given to people to eat. And, people also debate why this was exactly, but it's also obvious that things in our world changed pretty dramatically at some point there, right? I mean, in the Garden of Eden, even animals were not eating other animals. And we obviously know that there's carnivorous animals that, have to eat meat to survive. And unfortunately, what's probably less obvious to some people is that humans also need to eat animal products to survive, right? You'll develop some pretty serious nutrient deficiencies if you don't long-term or aren't supplementing. So this is it's just not the reality of the world that we live in anymore. I mean, if I could follow a plant-based diet, and if that diet were meeting all my nutritional needs, if I could be abundantly healthy eating that way, if all the food I ate were satiating and satisfying and taste good, if that was part of a sustainable food production system, and if no animals actually died in the production of all that food, I mean, I would love to follow a plant-based diet.
That's a whole lot of ifs in there.
Exactly. We know that all those things are fantasies, right? I mean, right. Just none of that is the reality of the world that we live in today.
Well, so even the quality, and I didn't mean to interrupt, Kat, but even the quality of the amino acids in so-called plant-based proteins, they're nowhere near what you get in an animal-based food, which has complete proteins. Any animal-based food, an egg, red meat, chicken, you name it, all of them have the complete profile of the amino acids. Now, that's not by accident, whereas with plant-based, you can get a lot of them, but you have to eat a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I remember asking Dr. Will Cole, who wrote the Ketotarian book, where it's mostly plant-based, but he even recommends fish and eggs because they have those complete amino acids in there. And so, and I asked him, I said, is it possible for you to get the complete amino acid profile in your diet? And he said, yeah, but it's really hard. You would have to hunt down different, a wide variety of sources of plant-based. And even then, it's the bioavailability of that amino acid at that point. There's just too many moving parts to say that a plant-based protein is going to be anything but far inferior to an animal-based one.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. In a lot of ways, I see veganism, vegetarianism as this highly unrealistic, highly idealistic attempt to achieve essentially heaven on earth now. But that's just not the world we live in. It's not sustainable. It's not healthy. Animals are still dying, even when you're eating a plant-based diet. We know that.
Yes. There's been several documentaries, the different low-carb documentaries that have come out that have pointed that out. It's all right, you like your plants, there's a bunch of dead animals that make that plant because the pesticides kill off a lot of animals, and then you need dead animals to use as fertilizer in the ground to help grow those sacred plants. And look, if you eat plants, it's all good. Just don't only eat plants is what we're saying, because I think a mixed diet is probably pretty healthy for a lot of people. Yeah. Some of us need to do more animal than plant, but I think people can probably figure it out on their own through trial and error.
Yeah,
A
absolutely.
lot of people ask me, Jimmy, how do you get such good deep sleep? Well, there's a lot of things that I do, but one of the newest things that I recently added is this upgraded magnesium from a company called Upgraded Formulas. Go to their website, upgradedformulas.com, and you can learn all about this nano technology that they use for this particular mineral of magnesium. Again, it's called Upgraded Magnesium, and it's got all the different forms of magnesium in it using the nanotechnology so it gets absorbed a lot better. Guys, I have seen my deep sleep improve by as much as 30 to 40% simply by adding in this product along with sunshine exposure, darkness in the room, cooler temperature, all of the things that I always have done. So again, upgradedformulas.com is the website. Go check them out.
My husband grew up on a ranch, and he talks about how when the harvesters come out, the vultures swarm around it because they know what's coming. The world we live in is just, the reality is that there is death in order that there is life. I mean, even Jesus' sacrifice on the cross, I think, is an example of that. So, so that's the world we live in. That's reality. Something else that I think people will use is this commandment in the Bible, thou shalt not kill.
Yeah.
Pretty obvious that Bible never intended for that to apply to animals.
Humans.
People.
Right.
Yeah.
Humans. That's what he's talking about.
Yes, humans. The Bible's pretty clear. People were made in the image of God, animals were not. But I do think that the Bible also makes it clear that humans were meant to have dominion over the earth. We were meant to be stewards of the earth. And yeah. I think there is a lot we can learn there about caring about how animals are raised, though. There's examples all throughout the Bible. A lot of the Old Testament laws that were given to the Israelites were about how to take care of their animals.
Yes.
Jesus says you can work on the Sabbath if it's to help out a distressed animal. Simeon and Levi, two of Joseph's brothers, were cursed for abusing farm animals. So, we look at how a lot of animals are raised now. Chickens that they don't even have enough space to move around. They have to cut off their beaks so that they don't cannibalize each other. And cows that are given antibiotics their whole life just so that they can survive.
Right.
And of course, it's so much healthier for us too when we do care about how those animals are raised.
I think we can all agree, vegans, keto, carnivore people, paleo people, all can agree alike. Factory farming has ruined the health of a lot of people. Is factory farmed meat better than highly processed grains and sugars? Yeah. But that's not the point. The point is we should be demanding, by voting with our dollars, going and buying a quarter of a cow like Kat did, having backyard chickens and visiting the farmer's market like Jimmy does. Like, there's little things you can do to convince yourself and to basically convince the world, hey, we don't want that crap anymore. Give us the better quality. I'm organizing a 50th birthday party for myself. And one of the menu items they had was grass-fed beef sliders. I was like, whoa, like even they get it that people want some quality. I put it on the menu, by the way. So, duh, they're going to put it there. I want to reward them for honoring people that want that kind of thing.
Yeah, very cool. It's awesome to see people getting more and more on board with that. So here's another example. And this one I think is actually funny when you understand how this one is misinterpreted. So the book of Daniel, Daniel, him and his friends, they're taken exile to Babylon. They're sent to work in the King Nebuchadnezzar's court. And as part of that, they're given all the king's food. They refuse to eat the king's food. So Daniel 10:3, people use this verse. It says, Daniel, he says, I ate no delicacies, no meat or wine entered my mouth, nor did I anoint myself at all for 3 full weeks. And he, of course, stayed healthy. He was successful. And so people will use that to say, hey, look, he didn't eat meat. This was great for him. But let's go back to the beginning of the book, Daniel 1, and it explains why they were not eating meat, why they were eating this way. So it says, Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. So the issue with the meat in the king's food was that probably two things. One, it probably wasn't prepared according to their Old Testament, the Israelites' dietary law, and it also might have been sacrificed to these pagan gods. So therefore, he asked the chief of the eunuchs, the people who were over him, to allow him to not defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who assigned your food and your drink. For why should he see that you were in worse condition than the youths who are of your own age? So the eunuch is concerned. He's like, hey, you're not going to be eating meat. You're not going to be healthy. You're not going to be strong, right? That's what everyone's expecting. Then Daniel said to the steward over him and his friends, test your servant for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with us according to what you see. So they do that. They let him eat nothing but vegetables and water. And at the end of 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. Okay, so people will look at that and say, well, look, they ate vegetables, they didn't eat meat, they were great. But here's the point of this story. The book of Daniel is not a story about how Daniel and his friends made good dietary choices. It is a story about how, because they were honoring God, God intervened supernaturally and spared them and used them as an example of his providence in their life, right? So we know later on in the book of Daniel, Daniel and his friends are spared from a den of lions. They're spared from a fiery furnace. And this is the exact same thing. They were spared from a plant-based diet, essentially. And it
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I believe, were the three.
Those are the ones.
Yeah.
So this is a story about how God supernaturally intervenes into things that should be hurting them in order to display himself to this pagan nation and in order to bless these people who were honoring him. So you read this and it actually just seems crazy that people would use this to try to justify a plant-based diet, because it's pretty much saying the opposite, right?
Well, you can cherry pick Bible verses, and a lot of people do, well-meaning Christians do, because when you're trying to make a point, it's easier to only give a short little context than the whole context of the passage. And we see that not just in the Bible, but with lots of things in life. You hear one little thing or see one little clip out of context, and then people are like up in arms, but then you see the whole context and you go, oh, wow, that's nothing like what the short little clip, the one little verse was saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So have you heard of Daniel fast? People will do these.
Yes, of course. Yeah. There was a very popular book. There was a very popular book about that a couple years back.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've seen the website. I've known some people who've done it. But it just seems funny to me, because that's not the point when you really understand.
Yeah, but again, that's taking out of context one little verse, one little so trust me. And I remember I used to work in Christian bookstores back in the 90s, and there was this guy named Dr. Don Colbert. And I remember the books because people, I need the Colbert diet. Talks about eating vegetarian for Bible, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, okay. So one day I was flipping through it, and I wasn't anything. I was a junk food eater at the time. So this was in the 90s. And I'm looking at this book and I'm going, I'm hungry. Like I'm looking at, I would get hungry. Like even then I could never do that. But the justification, well, that's what the Bible says. Well, guess what? Mr. Colbert, Dr. Colbert has now gone keto. He now embraces a ketogenic diet. He wrote a ketogenic diet. And here was the fun part. Somebody pointed this out to me. They're like, do you know Dr. Don Colbert? And I'm like, that sounds familiar. He wrote a book about the Bible justifying veganism. Oh, yeah, I remember that guy. He's now keto, and he credits your book, Keto Clarity, changing his mind somewhat about it. I was like, say what? Like, how cool is that for like full circle?
That's awesome. Yeah, that book, by the way, was one of the first things I read when I went keto, and was really helpful to me too.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about the Old Testament? There you go. Yep. That was super helpful for me. Love that book. The Old Testament dietary laws. These are really interesting too. So in the Old Testament, in Leviticus, God gives the Israelites this long list of laws about how they're supposed to live. And some people now will say, oh, these were just random rules meant to test people. It was supposed to, show them that they couldn't be righteous on their own. But it was so much more than that. All of these laws were given to people for the purpose of making their lives better, to bless them, so that they would be a nation that people could look at and say, this nation is blessed by God. So we aren't held to these laws anymore. That's really clear in the New Testament. But
right.
I still think there's so much we can learn from them about what is good for us and what's not. So Leviticus 11 outlines how the Israelites were supposed to eat. And it all has to do with what animals you are and are not supposed to eat. So it says you're not supposed to eat carnivores. It says you're not supposed to eat animals that are like bottom feeders, scavengers, things like that. But then it goes into this explanation of how you may eat animals with a divided hoof and that chews the cud. It seems kind of random, but when we look at that, what that's doing is it is distinguishing ruminants from non-ruminants.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and then it, goes on to say, no, a camel has a divided hoof, but it doesn't chew the cud, so don't eat that. A rabbit eats grass, but it has a paw, so don't eat that. I mean, it seems kind of random, but what this was describing at the time was that ruminants, these animals with multiple stomachs, they eat grass that's not very nutritious food, and they can turn it into something that is very nutritious.
Yes.
And they're very good processors of what they eat. And oh, by the way, their fat is probably the best in terms of high quality fat, right? Least omega-6, most saturated fat. So how interesting is it that the Bible goes to all this work to distinguish ruminants? How easy would it have been to say, well, by the way, if you're not aware of this, ruminants are red meat, right? Deer, beef, sheep, goats, things like that. Red meat, that is red meat. How easy would it have been for the Bible to say, okay, all this red meat, all these ruminants, don't eat this. Or even don't eat animals. And it doesn't say that. It says eat these.
And I think that's one of the reasons why on Noah's Ark we saved the animals, because we would need them to feed the population. It's not really talked about within the context of the Bible, but a lot of biblical scholars talk about that what if all the animals had perished in the flood with all the humans? It's like the earth would have never survived. So
that's a really good point. Yeah.
Yes. So, and one of the things that clouds this discussion too, Kat, which fascinating, by the way, you've done your homework. Thank you for bringing it today. But one of the things that clouds this is the whole concept of unclean animals. And you kind of alluded to it there just a moment ago. And a lot of the sacrificial animals, well, you had a sacrificial lamb and they'd pour the blood over the door so that the death angel would pass by. And so you're not allowed to eat those kind of animals too that are sacrificed. So there's a lot of little like Old Testament laws that make meat eating a little more difficult in the minds of people. Well, we need them for sacrifices. We don't have any for eating. Therefore, you're going to eat plant-based by default. What's wrong with that logic?
Well, we've already talked about that's just not the reality of the world we live in, for one thing. I think if it was better for people to eat plant-based, it would have been so easy for the Bible to just say that, And a lot of these animals that were sacrificed, they would still eat a lot of the animal. They might sacrifice the fat, but the animal, it was used. They weren't putting these animals to waste. Right. That was part of being good stewards of them. And the Bible does talk about how fat is the Lord's, and it even says don't eat fat. But if you really understand, most people understand the Hebrew of that word to mean a certain type of fat, suet, the fat around the liver, and it may have been because that fat contained more toxins. It may have been because that was the best fat. What's a sacrifice if it doesn't cost something? But there's still so many animals they had and so much meat that was good for food, and it was clearly given to them.
I can't help but ask this question. What do you think biblical time people would think about a plant-based burger, which is very popular? You mentioned it earlier, the Beyond Meat, the Impossible, and it seems like everything is turning into this plant-based in the stores these days. Are they trying to get rid of meat on the back end of things by preparing the alternatives? But nobody's buying them. That's the thing. It's kind of the funny part of this story. I didn't mean to shift so quickly away from the Bible, but this is a nice aside that if there's no preclusion in the Bible to eating meat, what is the push to get people to eat these alternatives? Which ironically, if you don't want people to eat meat, why make these meat alternatives? Sean Baker does a hilarious job of finding these vegan people making these meat, and I have got quotation marks around that, versions of things. Oh, I made a lamb steak, plant-based. And I'm like, no, you didn't. You made a thing that looks like a lamb steak, but it ain't a lamb steak.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you go keto and thought you had to give up wine? Well, let me introduce you to Dry Farm Wines. It is the world's first sugar-free alcohol that is lower than your typical wines, organic, made at local farms that do it the right way. Most of the wines that you buy are from 3 really big companies, loaded with additives and preservatives, so many dozens of those kinds of things. You don't want all that junk in your wine. So go to dryfarmwines.com/Jimmy and they will ship you these wines. And just because you listen to this podcast, Dry Farm Wines is going to give you a bottle in your first order for just 1 cent. Go to dryfarmwines.com/Jimmy and you will get your bottle of wine for just 1 singular penny. Go check them out. Dry Farm Wines, you guys. It's wine o'clock somewhere. Let's go get some wine.
I think if the ancient Israelites, or even anyone in history more than about 100 years ago, I think if they'd seen this, they would just think it was so ridiculous, because what we see all throughout history is people valued meat. When basically any traditional culture, they ate as much as they could, as much as they had access to. That's really what we see all over the world.
Right.
And then I think they also just want to know that that wasn't a sustainable way to eat. They, we can't all eat that way. Why would you eat that way? We also really don't see people eating vegetables when they don't have to, They had grains, they had fruits, but just picking leaves off the ground, I don't think people ever thought of that as a good food before relatively recently.
I think they chose fasting before they would have vegetation. Vegetation would be if you're in a really extended fast and you don't have an animal kill. I'm talking about Paleo Man, for example, and you're in between kills. You'll fast for most of that, but then maybe a little bit of berries or leaves or whatever that they find if they feel a little peckish and they need to have a little something. But yeah, you're right. I think they would fast before they would eat vegetation.
I think that's true. Yeah.
And then when they would eat the animal, they wouldn't just eat the muscle meat, which is what we do in modern society, which is why I love what you do with your cow share. You get a bunch of little bits that you can't buy in grocery stores, and that provides nutrients. Going back to your FNTP background, nutrients are everything, and animal foods is where the nutrients are at. It's still hard. I was at the farmer's market right before they closed down a couple weeks before, and I had my 20 pounds of grass-fed beef. And I was talking to a friend there that I was by, and she's like, "Wow, that looks like a lot of meat." I said, "Yeah, it's all I eat." And she's like, "No fruits and vegetables? No, what do I need those for?" "Well, where do you get your nutrients?" I said, "From this, because there's lots of nutrients in that." There's such a disconnect these days, just with the general population, that nutrients are in meat because it's been so vilified so heavily. And you know this. You were carnivore for a little while. I think your moniker on Instagram for a little while was related to carnivore, and so I'm sure you got a lot of those same kind of comments.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just crazy that there are people out there who think meat is nothing but protein, and it's just
or a blob of nothingness. How do you look at meat and think it's just a blob of no nutrition? Yeah, maybe fat, maybe protein, but no nutrients at all. Like, we seriously need we need an FNTP to go into the schools and say, "Okay, kids, we're going to learn something today about what's in grass-fed beef," and give them the lowdown. Like, how cool would that be? Of course, the National Education Association would never allow that to happen. So.
No.
Yeah, it's a funny thing living in modern society, and a lot of the things that we believed were true about nutrition, at least culturally speaking, not people like you and me, because we've had our eyes open for many years, but culturally speaking, people just kind of buy into what they've been told. I'm hoping that's changing, Kat, with all the craziness of the last 2 years. Like, come on, people. If it's not obvious by now, we're being lied to about a lot of things. It's not that far of a stretch to think we've been lied to about nutrition.
Right. Yeah, I sure hope some good can come out of that.
I'm going to leverage it. I'm going to keep being a voice like I've always been. So, and I know you will, and many others out there will be too. Anything else on your list that you had as far as like biblical reasoning for not eating meat, or did you have anything else on there?
One other thing I like to point out is something I've also seen from Christians sometimes, is that sometimes they seem hesitant to adopt something like low carb. because, you know, even if they need to lose weight, even if they know they need to get healthier, it's like they don't feel like they should be taking shortcuts or doing some fad diet. They just want to be depending on God for the strength they need to eat less and exercise more. And I just so want people to see that they're buying into just as much of a fad diet. I mean, more, you know, a real fad diet.
Yes.
Doing that. And there's so much God has given us in his creation for health and for healing. And it's not like eating less is some de facto position. Like that's just as much a fad.
But that goes back to the conditioning again in our society, that the only way you lose weight is to eat less. The only way that you get fit is to run on a treadmill. And it's like we have such a narrow-mindedness of what we think health is, when really health is this totality of things. Like I'm doing ice plunges now, and I'm standing in the backyard barefoot, letting sunshine hit my body and grounding. You know, I do all kinds of things. I do infrared sauna therapy. Like those are things that most people don't do because they're so narrowly focused on the minutia of things they've been told to do. And those things are dead wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely agree.
Yeah, it makes it difficult in this society when you have people with the blinders on and all they want to see is kind of a monolithic view of health. And one thing that I've done for many years, and I know you do in your work, is to try to expand people's knowledge about health. And so what is something that people don't really think about when it comes to their health? And it could be literally anything. Just curious what you think. I'll pick your brain a little bit. What is something that they don't really know about, but they should know?
Well, you know, I mentioned already that one of my big emphasis is healthy fat. And just the more and more I learn, the more I get interested in that, because there's such a disconnect. You know, a lot of people at this point know that butter is better than margarine, and that's great. But what people don't realize is virtually any time they go out to a restaurant, they're still eating those same oils. And just the more I learn, the more I realize how damaging those are for, you know, creating some of the root causes of insulin resistance in the first place, arterial disease, mental health, everything. And it's, you know, it seems too extreme to people, I think, sometimes to cut out eating out. I mean, we're talking even things people think are healthy, like Panera, Chick-fil-A, you know. But it's so worth it because those are just so toxic. So that's something else I'm trying to educate people about.
Yeah, the seed oils, you know, thanks to people like Dr. Kate Shanahan, she's been on that for years.
Yeah,
but they get deep into your fat cells, and it takes years to release those omega-6 fats, those rancid fats, you know, and you could start developing heart disease, not really eat many carbohydrates, but having lots of these seed oils. And it's literally in everything, even the so-called low-carb foods, guys. Be careful when you go like buy roasted almonds, for example. Oh, it's almonds. You look at it roasted in soybean or cottonseed oil, and you're like, crap. Like, you really have to pay attention. If you're not, you will allow these things in your body and not even know it. And they're highly inflammatory. Yeah,
exactly. And even all the Atkins Foods now, unfortunately. I got really, really strict about cutting out seed oils while I was pregnant this last year.
Yeah.
And I mean, even up until that point, I wasn't cooking with these. I wasn't buying processed foods, but I was probably still getting so many just by eating out occasionally. And it just did wonders for my skin. It was a huge thing. Like, I could see the difference even after eating, you know, healthy for so long.
Yes.
It makes a huge difference.
What was that like, by the way, being pregnant? Because I assume you kept eating your normal, mostly animal-based diet. Tell us that experience.
Yeah. So, I mean, I did the best I could. First trimester, some, you know, nausea. I definitely wasn't as low carb as I've been before, but food quality, we've talked about that, right? I still know how important that was. It was really focused on that. And I can just see so many ways that it paid off. It's just tragic, for one thing, the kind of advice that pregnant women are given. You know, they're told these kind of oddly specific things like don't eat lunch meat. You know, yeah, there's a tiny, tiny risk of food poisoning with that. But the fact that you're going to focus on that and not tell them just how damaging sugar and seed oils are and things like that, not getting good nutrition during that time is really sad. But, you know, I really focused on that and I saw it pay off. I did not gain extra weight, didn't have any stretch marks. My baby was always perfectly healthy. I had COVID while I was in my third trimester. It was nothing. I mean, pregnancy is an immunocompromised state to start with, but it was, I thought it was a cold until I was almost over it and got tested. So just, you know, people saying, oh, you're going to feel miserable. You know, in your third trimester, your ankles are going to swell. Never had any of it. I was just waiting to start feeling bad, and it never happened. You know, I'm doing great now too. My baby's doing great. So I can see these things paying off in like every way.
Yeah, you look vibrant. And like I said, I met you like 3 or 4 years ago at the Adapt conference, and yeah, lots happened in your life since then. And congratulations, by the way, on the little munchkin.
Thank you.
Are you going to raise the munchkin as a real food, animal-based food, kind of get them started early, or are you just?
Oh, absolutely.
It's so funny because people they weigh that. I want my kid to enjoy being a kid and have a tree. And look, I think it's age dependent, obviously. If they're 6 years old, mommy, I want a cookie, you'll make a healthy version of a cookie for them, right? So it's like it's not this all or nothing proposition that they must eat really healthy and be real strict about it, because they'll resent you later if you do that.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, another misconception I think people have is that healthy food can't be tasty and good. And, you know, if we're talking about real whole foods, the better it is, the more it actually tastes good. So I think there's so much we can do with, you know, making healthy desserts. I don't have a problem with some fruit for a kid, you know. But my husband and I, we already tell her, she's 7 weeks old, but we tell her, you know, as soon as you start eating food, we're going to give you egg yolks and ground beef, and I'm going to try to get her to like liver. I don't like liver, but I'm going to try to get her to like liver. Yeah, kids love fat. You know, I would have eaten a stick of butter when I was a kid if my mom let me. Kids love fat, and there's a good reason for it.
I actually had a lady on, this has been, over a decade ago on my podcast, from New Zealand, and she was very sick, the lady, but her baby in the grocery store was what changed her mind about healthy fats. The baby instinctively grabbed the butter off the shelf and rammed the butter in their mouth.
Oh, wow.
Started eating it. And of course, she was vegan, the mom, and go, oh my God, how can you? But the more she thought about it, it was like, wow, she instinctively, the kid, the baby, instinctively knew that's nutrition. And the mom sitting here deluded as an adult, thinking that what she was doing as a vegan was healthy. And that opened her eyes that, whoa, I need to be adding in healthy fats, and then eventually animal-based foods and fats. It's just funny how, like, if you leave people and take away all the propaganda, take away all the like external messages of this is what you should do, and leave them to their own devices of what they choose, they're going to choose a healthier diet naturally, younger, of course, before their minds get perverted.
Wow, that's amazing. But yeah, they've done studies on that, giving kids the options of foods, and they actually go for the better ones. They know.
Yes. I had the famous vegan doctor, Dr. Neil Barnard, on one time, and he just flat out on my podcast, I had tried to keep from laughing, but I couldn't help. He's like, babies don't eat meat. I'm like, so I made like a video on YouTube where I have that babies don't eat meat little sound, and then I show all these kids eating like a rib and all this, and made like a little fun little video about it. It's still on YouTube if you want to go look at it, guys. But it's just funny that babies don't eat meat. No, babies prefer it. Especially if you don't bastardize their taste buds with crappy garbage, as I call it. They will develop a desire for meat, for cheese, for better nutrition if you feed it to them early. That's what their brains will then remember. Whoa, that not only tastes good, but I feel good eating it, and that will serve them better later in life.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We get them hooked on sugar because it's so crazy that people think kids need sugar for some reason. You know, it's crazy.
And baby food, oh my God. I started looking at some of the baby food containers, and I'm going, who feeds their kid this crap? But it's like loaded with sugar. Well, it's mushed up bananas. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Where's the protein?
Is what really gets me. I would love someday to see a better baby formula out there, because every one of them, even the natural ones, are sugar and seed oils. And I think it's tragic that that's what they're getting started on. Yeah.
Did you breastfeed your kid?
Yeah. I mean, we're still at it. She's only 7 weeks old. I will do everything I can to avoid formulas, because even if it came to that, there's just no good ones out there. I've looked.
Yeah, and breast milk gets a lot of crap as well. Well, it's full of carbs. I'm like, it's got a lot of saturated fat in there too.
Yeah.
Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, literally, with the bathwater in this, because there's just such good nutrition. And again, God made that, and He wasn't stupid with what He put in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And the more saturated fat I eat, the more, that changes your milk, which is crazy.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So what are your favorite saturated fats? I'm assuming grass-fed butter is in there somewhere. What else?
Yeah, absolutely. I love making my own tallow. So I'll save beef fat from either the beef that I'm cooking, or I'll just go buy some at the store and make my own. That's my favorite cooking fat. Even beef fat is even a lot better than even like pork fat or chicken fat. Those are still great compared to seed oils, but beef fat is really the best you can do. So I cook with that. Cheese is great. Butter is great. Really try to stick to those animal fats. Even avocado oil, olive oil, those aren't seed oils, but I still don't even use those a lot because animal fats are just better whenever you can.
Yes. Love me some animal fats. Although I do love coconut oil as well.
Coconut oil is a good one.
What's that?
Coconut oil is a good one. It's very saturated. Yeah.
And it's the most saturated, even more so than butter. People are like, oh, butter's a saturated fat, and red meat. I'm like, it's like 50-50 mono and saturated, those things. Yeah. But coconut oil's 90% saturated fat. And then things like avocado oil and olive oil give you some good mono unsaturated. I think it's good to balance it. With an emphasis on saturated, because we've deprived our bodies of it for so long, because it's been the boogeyman in nutrition. And people like yourself and me and others that have tried to bring attention back to saturated fat. Part of the problem, though, is there's this movement within even the keto and carnivore subset of avoiding fat. What do you think about backing off on fat, putting more emphasis on protein? And they ignore that gluconeogenesis is an issue because it's only a demand-driven thing, and da-da-da. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I think some people really can benefit temporarily from lowering fat for weight loss a little bit. I know you've done that, right? Even done some pretty modified fast. Yeah. I mean, very effective for weight loss, right? Sometimes what I see though is that I think there's these people in the keto carnivore, maybe not so much carnivore, but this keto especially, who are just trying to make their message more palatable. And so they kind of align it with things that are mainstream. I don't want to freak people out talking about saturated fat. So don't eat saturated fat, or you still got to restrict your calories. And let's not lie to people. They're here because that didn't work for them. So we need to just teach people that they need to get on board with a new paradigm. That's why they're here, So I hate to see that, but I think that's what happens.
Yeah, the protein sparing modified fast. Look, I think it's a good tool in the toolbox. I'm sure you've used it with clients, told people about it and said, hey, look, try it, see how you do. This is the thing. I think the absolutism of the diet world just makes me sick to my stomach. When I first came in on the scene a million years ago, there wasn't so much absolutism as there is now. I think with the advent of so many people talking about diet and health and social media and all the podcasts that are out there now, it just seems like everybody's got an opinion and they're sharing it, and opinions are like butts, and most of them stink is the phrase I like to use, because look, I think at the end of the day, you have to figure out what's right for you, and getting help from people like yourself, if people want to hire you, which, by the way, on her Instagram page, low.carb.with.kat, there's a little clickable link there, and you can hire Kat. I'm sure that right now is a really good time to start keto right, as you put there, because you've got a nice little program that will get people started. So definitely go check that out. Is there a pithy website, or is that where you want people to go?
That's the website. Yeah, thank you.
Good.
I've got information there about my e-course.
Yes, it's a Wix site app. So go check that out, you guys. But Kat, wow, what a cool interview this was. This is my first interview back, official recording back of the new year. Happy New Year to you, and hope that you and the little 7-week-old munchkin and the husband all do well this year. And thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Happy New Year's to you too. And I've always regretted that when I met you at that ADAPT conference, we didn't get a photo. So next time I see you at a conference, we're gonna get a photo together.
Photo and a hug. I'm a hugger, and so I think I did hug you that day.
Yes.
But we didn't get a photo. So yes, let's definitely make that happen. But thank you for being here. And
Get inspiration from the Living La Vida Low Carb Show. Hey, the livinglowcarbshow.com. Woo!
Have you experienced the dreaded keto flu? Did you know that most of these symptoms are actually due to your body dumping excess electrolytes? This is where Element comes in. Element is a tasty electrolyte drink mix with everything you need and nothing you don't. That means lots of salt with no sugar. Element is formulated to help anyone with their electrolyte needs and is perfectly suited to folks following a keto, low-carb, or paleo diet. Element contains a science-backed electrolyte ratio, 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium, with none of the junk, no sugar, no coloring, no artificial ingredients, no gluten, no fillers, no BS. Everyone needs electrolytes, especially those on low-carb diets, or if you practice intermittent or extended fasting, if you're physically active, or sweat a lot. Add Element today and see how much better you feel and perform. Use the URL drinklmnt.com/Jimmy.